Hello everybody and welcome back to 10-Minute Reviews, where we review books. We will eventually do movies and other little things, but primarily books. We read. That's what we do. We read a ton of books. So today I want to talk about one of the greatest fantasy books probably ever written. If I were, and one day I will, do a top 10 list, greatest fantasy books, fantasy series, this author is going to land on it. Definitely be on my top 10 greatest fantasy authors, but his first series, what I'm talking about, is Raymond E Feist, and I'm talking about the very beginning of his Rift Wars saga, which ended up encompassing numerous trilogies and somewhere in the realm of around 20 books and span hundreds of years of time within that kingdom. But I am only going to talk about 2 books. Normally I do 1 book, but this particular book was so large when he first wrote it that it ended up being split into 2. The book originally was called Magician, but he ended up having to split it into 2 full-length novels called Magician Apprentice and Magician Master. Now, like most fantasy books, this ends up in medieval-ish times, medieval-adjacent times, in the kingdom of Midkemia, which is on its own, little world and planet, which does end up coming into play in later books. And it's, just one kingdom. It doesn't encompass even the entirety of its own continent. Now, the kingdom of Midkemia is typical with its kings, its barons, its dukes, counts, so on and so forth. Has magic, and the book starts off in basically the frontier, in a frontier barony or duchy. Duchy of all of a sudden it's suddenly escaping when it was just on the tip of my tongue. But it deals with one family in particular, and the children mostly, because the father dies, and so then it deals with the 2 sons and the daughter, Princess Caroline, Prince Arutha, and Prince Liam. Liam is the older brother, Arutha is the younger brother, and talks a little bit of some of the history of the kingdom throughout the series. But what the first part is really about is it's about those 3 and about a foundling, an orphan named Pug, who on their big naming day when they get taken as apprentices, basically to begin the rest of their life, he's hoping for various things, just like his boyhood friend Thomas. Thomas wants to be a soldier, and nobody selects Pug, so he ends up being selected by the court magician, an old wise magician named Colgan, smoking a pipe, all the usual stuff. Now, the book itself, the overall general plot line is a rift, a portal has opened up, and soldiers from another world are invading. So Midkemia gets embroiled into this war, and that's when their father dies, and they end up having to defend their kingdom. Now, they end up having to defend their portion of the kingdom, and that's kind of how it starts. But the book really ends up focusing on Pug, and Pug ends up doing some minor heroics, rescuing Princess Caroline at one point, but he has no talent for magic. He eventually manages to cast one minor spell, but that's about it. And then he gets captured. He gets captured by the enemy and taken through the portal to their world. So the first book of the 2, as it was split, Magician Apprentice, he ends up on the other planet as a prisoner of war. And it deals with his trials and tribulations through there. And then in Magician Master, it deals with kind of the tail end of his trials and tribulations and the ending of the war. As the war continues to go and elves and dwarves have gotten involved in it, there's a big story about Pug, big stories about Arutha and Prince Caroline and Liam. And they all end up basically intertwining, and this just kicks off this 2-book, this 1 book split into 2, just kicks off what ended up being one of the biggest fantasy series I've ever read, and was absolutely phenomenal. The Rift Wars saga it's hands down the best fantasy series I've ever read. So you guys have to watch this. Now, spoilers are about to come ahead, so if you don't want any spoilers, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, comment down below. If you've read it, we'd love to talk about it. And turn this video off and go read Magician Apprentice. But if you're still sticking around, that means you want some spoilers. So Pug ends up being captured. Now, I'm not going to be able to give all the spoilers and the entire plot line for these books, because, again, this book was massive. Combined, it's like 800 pages. But what Pug ends up discovering, once he's on the other planet, he's a slave, but he gets noticed by the Great Ones, and the Great Ones are uber powerful wizards. The power that the spells that Kulgan could do, very, very minor, very small things. The spells that the Great Ones can do are on the level of your level 20 Dungeons and Dragons wizards. I mean, it's unreal what they can do. And they're called the Great Ones, and in this kingdom, the kingdom of Suranawani, they are above the law. They are above the emperor. They can do whatever they want. They are considered above the law. And one of them assesses Pug by some random act and ends up taking him. And ends up taking him from the clan that the family, the house actually that owns Pug, leaving behind his friend Laurie, that was also a slave, a friend that he had made. And Pug gets taken to their academy and is taught their magic. And what he learns is there's two types of magic, the lesser path and the greater path. All that exists in the kingdom of Mikimia is the lesser path. Pug has a talent for the greater path, which means that it's impossible for him to access the lesser path, which is why in Suranawani, Great Ones actually have lesser path magicians. They are not Great Ones, they're not above the law, but they have lesser path magicians that are able to cast spells that the Great Ones cannot, because their minds are not able to do the lesser path magic. So Pug ends up graduating, becoming a Great One, so he then ends up free. And some of the first things he does, he goes and frees his wife's slave, the slave that he had a relationship with, and marries her, and just becomes a Great One, gets a new name, Malamber, becomes a Great One in Suranawani. Tries to free his friend Laurie, but Laurie actually refuses because he's going on a secret mission back to Mikimia to attempt to negotiate a peace treaty. So Pug eventually gets fed up, I guess you could say, with the excesses, the slavery, the murder. I mean, it's old Roman Colosseum type, let's murder the slaves with lions kind of games. Gets fed up with it, destroys the Colosseum, escapes back through the rift, makes it back to Mikimia, goes back to being named Pug. Now, through all this, meanwhile, Arutha of the Barony of Cride, that's what it was, Barony of Cride, he ends up having to take over because his brother is off in the east, the eastern kingdoms, and ends up fighting a holding action that is almost legendary. He defends the kingdom, or the barony of, or the duchy of Cride, the duchy of Cride, from the Suranawani armies. They call the Surani armies. And then here's some traitorous things being said about Guy du Bastyra, the Duke of Bastyra, basically trying to do a coup, a civil war, as the king is old and sickly, and he's trying to capture the princess Anita so he can marry her, and he's just trying to take over the kingdom because he thinks that the current king is incompetent. So Arutha goes to try and rescue her. So he goes to rescue the princess and ends up meeting a thief named Jimmy the Hand that ends up being a very major character in later books, and probably my favorite character, a lot of people's favorite character. He's pretty freaking awesome, pretty smart. So he, of course, naturally does end up rescuing Anita, and as the book ends, the peace treaty is getting ready to occur, and this legendary evil magician, Macross the Black, from the King Mikimia, turns out is one of the few that can do greater path magic within Mikimia. He ends up basically causing a double cross. To the Surani, the kingdom double crossed them during the peace treaty. To the kingdom, one of their allies ended up double crossing them during the peace treaty. But basically, fighting breaks out during the peace treaty. Macross takes Pug. They go in and they actually close this rift. And the reason they close the rift, Macross didn't want the peace treaty to go through because if they left the rift open, it was attracting other more malevolent, more powerful beings. So they needed to close it because otherwise Mikimi was going to be under a great threat. So they end up closing it, and for the most part, that's how the book ends, although there are a few other things, such as when the Duke of Cryde died, one of the last things he did was officially adopt Pug into the family, the Condoin family, Condoin. So he officially became part of that royal family, who, and it turned out, ended up becoming the royal line. They had been part of the royal line before. There were 3 or 4 main families. So Liam, the older brother, ends up taking the crown because Arutha doesn't want it, and they have a bastard brother, Martin, who's older and does become acknowledged, which means he could make a bid for the crown. He ends up turning it down. So Liam becomes the king of the kingdom. The kingdom is so large that they typically split it in 2, and there's a prince in Krondor that basically rules the western half. So Arutha becomes the Prince of Krondor, Martin becomes the Duke of Cryde, Arutha marries Anita, Pug is gifted an island to build a school of magic, which is what he wants to do. And that's basically how the first 2 books, The Magician Apprentice and Magician Master, end. Again, you guys just have to read this. This series is incredible. I could seriously talk about this series for a day. I could probably film 100 videos just talking about this entire series. I probably need 4 hours of videos just talking about each individual book. They're just absolutely phenomenal. They're incredible. And if you guys that have read them, please comment, email us. I would love to just go back and forth. Raymond E Feist is one of my favorite authors, and I think one of the greatest authors ever, fantasy-wise. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you guys enjoy this. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons. We'll catch you next time. Bye now.